Hey, my name is Kristen Debenko. I'm a senior PM on the foundations team at GitLab, and I've got Anne Lash here with me from the UXR team. We're here to do our biweekly navigation update and talk through some of the cool things that we've done over the last 2 weeks on the team and how we're progressing towards the navigation direction that we've set forth. I've got an agenda on the issue, which I'll be posting as well in the YouTube description, so you can follow along on this agenda. Overall, this week, we did do another direction update, which adds more business value into our direction. I've added a link to the MR, so you can look at that. High level, we're looking at how to not take away a user's experience, a focus on SUS and net retention overall as our main business metrics. I also added a link here to watch a direction review with me and Orit, where we talk through the navigation and settings direction. And so that's also really interesting and a good thing to watch. Also, later today, this will be updated, and I'm going to have a call with Christy and Tori, and we're going to talk through why we are doing the North Star navigation instead of doing iteration. So that will be also a really cool video to consume and just kind of hear our thinking on why we aren't going directly to iteration on this, and we're investing heavily in design. Before I turn over to Anne, I also just wanted to mention that we did schedule menu, which has been an issue that's been open for a while. We have a design for that. That one is in 15.4 in this release, and we are going to be shipping that by end of this release. So it's really exciting. This is a small update to navigation that's a really positive improvement, and we're going to get it out in this release. So high level, that's kind of what's happened the last 2 weeks. Given that we're investing on design and UXR, Anne is here to go through the early stage concept validation and the insights from the tests. So the tests we've been talking about of the 6 designs, she's going to go through right now and say kind of all of the data around what they've seen from users and what are our next steps from that. And I just want to reiterate that this is a huge UXR test and investment from a design side. We don't usually do this at GitLab. It is different. And we are taking a quarter or 2 to make sure that we have the right design. So having Anne go through these, all of the insights that they've gotten and the rigor with which they've tested these 6 designs is really cool. And so I'm going to hand it over to her and let her show kind of what they discovered doing these tests.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kristen. Let me share my screen to get started. And yeah, so with that, I want to share, as Kristen said, the insights from this first round of testing. And it's basically at the stage of early concept validation. What that means is that the design team had basically 6 different design ideas that address known navigation challenges. And the goal of this research was to narrow down the number that we could take, and those narrowed down numbers of design concepts, take them into additional rounds of research further down the line. And why we do this at this point is, or this concept validation basically helps to understand which elements of these concepts resonate well with users, like what stands out to them, what do they like. And this can either lead to, taking one design and moving forward with it in this additional research that I was mentioning earlier, or it can also lead to actually forming a hybrid concept, because we noticed that there are certain elements from different concepts that resonated really well, and actually a new concept is being created. And how we did this research is we invited 15 technical and non-technical GitLab users to an unmoderated study on usertesting.com. And each participant got to see 2 of the 6 concepts. So it's important to remember that none of the participants saw all of the concepts. They just saw a selection of 2 that were randomized, that were shown to them in a randomized way. And for each concept, we asked participants to, state their general impressions on the concept, what stood out to them, for instance, what they liked, what they didn't like. But we also gave them a couple of tasks to, just see how they go about these tasks and if they could be successful, judging by the first step that they would take to solve that task. And what's also important to know about this research is that the concepts were shown in static images only. So this was not an interactive prototype where people could click around and actually go through the whole length of the task, but they just saw the first image of it, basically. And the reason for that is because we had 6 different design ideas, and it's not very efficient to basically create 6 interactive prototypes and then take these through testing, because that generates a lot of data. But instead, it's better to just use a static image, because we wanted to only get these first impressions from people and these first indicators on how they would go about certain tasks. And that's basically enough to, make a decision on, okay, what works, what doesn't work, and how should we move forward. But of course, in further testing rounds, like with the next testing round, we're basically having more interactive prototypes to get, more enhanced data and get more depth of the data. For those that are not very familiar with the concepts, in the slide deck, I outlined them basically, and also in the appendix, you see larger images of them and a more detailed description of what each concept is about. But at a high level, I want to say that there were 3 concepts that pretty much stuck with the traditional layout. So concept 1, 2, and also concept 4. What I mean by that is they had a sidebar and they had a top bar, but the content and how things were arranged in the left sidebar was different. But then there were also concepts like concept 3, 5, and 6 that basically broke with that pattern. And they had, for instance, just, everything moved basically to the left sidebar, or they may even have 2 left sidebars. So just keep that in mind. And before I go into the insights, just to, remind everyone on that again, with this research, we cannot say which design is the best one or which one to move forward with, or like that's the new design to take, simply because, again, it was not an interactive prototype. So it's more a gut level check of how people feel about these concepts. And again, not everyone saw all the concepts. So people only saw a selection of the concepts. So we definitely need more research to understand usability challenges better, and also how people feel about these concepts over time. All right, but let's talk a little bit what we know in terms of how people feel about these concepts. And what I want to start with is that there were elements in the concepts that participants universally appreciated. Things like the breadcrumb, for instance, really helps with orientation. It was something that people continuously pointed towards when we asked them where they were in a concept, or also when they wanted to backtrack. So that's something super important that any concept should have. Search bar on the top. People feel really strongly about that one, that the search belongs to the top bar and not in the left sidebar. The verbatim that we heard is that it's really, that's a standard, that it's very common to have it there, and people didn't really feel like we should move away from that. Also, having the option to collapse the sidebar to increase the center space is super important for people, because they do value the space they have in the center. And also, generally speaking, people liked if there were just a few menu options in the left sidebar. So, making efforts to reduce the amount of items in the left sidebar is appreciated. One of the concepts included a pinned section, which basically pinned, where people could pin an item that is relevant for them, or even 2. And that was seen as a great aspect of customization and putting things in the sidebar that is most relevant to a user. So people that saw concept 6, we heard a couple of people refer to it saying like, add this pin section to other concepts as well. So it was something that people generally liked. I mentioned that people saw 2 concepts. So of course, we asked them at the very end of the test if they had a preference against these 2 concepts. And what we saw is that there were 2 concepts that the majority of people liked. So 4 out of 5 voted for concept breadcrumb, which was concept 4, and 3 out of 5 preferred concept parent items only, which was concept 1. The other concept basically received less votes, and you could interpret that as they were like less favored. You might wonder now why that is. And for concept breadcrumbs and parent items only, they were generally speaking easier to grasp, because they were simpler in their layout and they didn't really introduce any new functionality. So generally speaking, people felt they were easier to use and they're just less overwhelming to look at when they see them for the first time. And some people even said like, hey, this looks more familiar to what I have in GitLab today. If you wonder how I got to these statements, we had rating scales as part of the test setup. So we had these different statements that address known navigation challenges, and we asked people to what extent they agree or disagree with it. So in this case, the statement was all around ease of use, and we can see that basically concept 1 and 4 received the highest agreements there, followed by concept 2. And same as I saw earlier refers to the concept around feeling overwhelmed when viewing this concept. And here we see that concept 1 and also concept 4 received the lowest agreement here, or like the highest disagreement with the statement. So in other words, people didn't feel as overwhelmed when viewing this. All the other concepts, on the other hand, they added more complexity, or they added new terminology that people just didn't know and would need time to understand. So that means they would need to invest a little bit of time to learn this new sort of navigation. In this research, we didn't really assess how motivated people would be to learn, like that was not the focus. But it's something to keep in mind because we have heard this feedback in the past that people struggle with learning GitLab and that it takes time and that it's not an easy thing to do. So we should be very conscientious about introducing new things and asking users to learn things. And if we do that, we should think about how to best support users in learning, like a new nav or any new content really. Lastly, I want to touch upon 2 things. A positive thing is that we asked users, how easy they can orientate themselves across the platform. We had a statement there as well. And what we can actually see that most concepts really allowed users to orientate themselves in a good way. So they would either point to the breadcrumb or to items highlighted in the left sidebar when we asked them where they are, and they knew basically where they are at. Even the concepts 5 and 6 that were the rankings were a little bit lower, they are still leaning towards agreement. So we can generally say that the concepts tested so far at this level and this fidelity, people felt comfortable knowing where they are. Last point I want to touch upon are the tasks that we asked people to do. These tasks were selected, quickly let me jump here, because they are applicable to a broad range of users. So we didn't want to introduce at this point any tasks that are specific to developers only or specific to product managers. So we looked at tasks that are, that any GitLab users could do or might be doing. And what we see that here is that there was basically one task, finding an issue or seeing all issues for the Orange project, which was pretty much easy to do across all concepts, except for concept 2, because that was the only concept where issues was not a specific item in the left sidebar. It was basically a submenu item, and people struggled to identify it there. The second task, which was around creating an epic, received mixed results across all concepts. And the main challenge here was how good were people in understanding the difference between groups and projects, and basically knowing that in order to create an epic, they would need to go back to the group level. If people weren't aware of that, then they struggled with that task. If they were aware of it, then they knew what they needed to do and succeeded in it. There was also a task related to finding a draft comment. And that was a very difficult task for people to do, because they really didn't expect that functionality to exist. So a lot of them had concerns that if they were to, type a comment and navigate away from it, that the comment wouldn't be there anymore. So in their mental model, they didn't think that this would even exist as a functionality, and hence didn't have a good opinion on where this would lead. We already discussed that this task was a bit of a stretch, and for the next round of research, we'll basically look at other options here to address that theme. Lastly, I want to talk about next steps. So what we've seen from this research is that there are 2 concepts that basically were perceived as easier to use and people had to learn less. And then there were other concepts that were basically more complex. And in the next round of research, we really want to go deeper into those. At this point, I cannot tell you which concepts or which hybrid concepts we'll look at, because that's basically a decision to come from design, which will come in the next couple of days. But from the research side of things, what we want to do more next time is to have a more structured approach to different personas. So in specific, we want to look at developers, product managers, and security professionals. We also want to include new GitLab users, so not just experienced GitLab users. Again, from an efficiency point of view, in this round of research, we focused only on experienced GitLab users. But of course, we want to also bring in new GitLab users because we know they, will have a different view and will help us to, get more perspective, like different views onto these design concepts. And with that, we'll also have a broader set of tasks, including persona-specific tasks, to make sure that we capture all the relevant user flows and not just those that are applicable to all personas. Yeah, and with that, I mentioned this before, I think we'll also have a more interactive prototype to, just increase the fidelity, and with that have a higher confidence in the concepts to move forward with. Last thing I'll mention on these insights is that as you go through the report, I just talked about the high-level findings and how these concepts compare against each other. But in the report, you'll have a section where I talk about detailed insights per concept. So you can basically consume at your own time how each concept resonated with users and how they felt about it. Thank you for listening.
Awesome. That is so cool, like just to see the breadth of that, the testing, and how all of it came together into a direction we can move forward with the designs. Thank you for that, Anne. That was awesome.
Thank you. You're welcome.